Bueno, buenas tardes.
Thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Jorge Piera. I am here on behalf of Javier Carrion. I'm going to talk about gvSIG and the standards, trying to answer a question that I'm sure you have asked yourselves at some point in your lives. What happens when you have a fox taking care of the hens? Let me show you the contents of my presentation. This is the structure. We'll first talk about an example of the use of patents, and I will then describe a problem, namely technological dependence. What is the solution to the problem? Standards, chapter number 3, and then in sections 4 and 5, we'll talk about gvSIG and standards and standardizing organizations. Number 6, foxes and hens. If you want to know about this, you better wait. And I will finish with some conclusions. Right, an example of patents, the bulb, a light bulb. It has nothing to do with the gvSIG world. Bulbs were discovered by Thomas Edison quite a few years ago. And, well, this guy was a great inventor. You all know them. You all know him, sorry. He invented things, and then he got patents for it, basically to make a lot of money. He discovered the light bulb. He patented it. He also discovered the dynamo to provide electricity to the bulb. He patented it, and then he set up his own company to provide people with power, with electricity. So it was a great business. He had the light bulb, the dynamo, the power source, so he basically monopolized the power sector in the United States. But what happened? An act was passed in the United States to fight monopolies. It was applied. It came into force, and so Thomas Edison was first forced to get out of the energy industry and then to generalize his patent on the light bulb. Thanks to that, the use of bulbs rose exponentially. And most likely, the fact that the state took actions against his patent on bulbs is the reason for us to have bulbs at home today. What's the problem in here then? Well, the use of patents cause what we call technological dependence. Let's say we have a patented bulb manufacturing company, Mr. Edison's company. He's a light bulb producer. Obviously, he's got a patent on them. And on the other hand, we have our friend here, gvSIG, who comes and buys bulbs because he wants to make the most of a great invention. So he buys 7 boxes full of light bulbs. What happens the moment Mr. gvSIG buys bulbs? He becomes dependent, technologically speaking, on the light bulb producer. That dependence is really bad because if the company raises the price of the bulbs, Mr. gvSIG has to pay more. And if the company is closed down, Mr. gvSIG will run short of bulbs. Taking the comparison to our world, we could say that there are companies that have created their own formats for storing spatial information. They have created their own standards, they have patented them, and they have control over use. In this case, if you use a closed format, you as a third company cannot create software to work on that format. It is indeed a similar example to that of the light bulb. Imagine a software company which has a closed system, a closed source system. Then Mr. gvSIG creates or buys formats of this kind. And then Mr. gvSIG becomes technologically dependent on the software company that created the closed source software. If Mr. gvSIG in the end buys that cartography, or, well, it's up to him, isn't it? But if Mr. gvSIG takes that format and transfers it to a third party, then he's actually transferring his own technological dependence onto a third party. This is an example of someone who buys a proprietary software. He then generates data and transfers them on the basis of closed source software to another person. If that person wants to exploit such data, he or she is forced to buy the license. So it's a bit of a loop resulting from the use of closed source software. I'm not saying you cannot use proprietary software. It's up to you. But what I meant to say is when you send data, you want to do it on open source and never do it on closed source, because if the producer of the maps, let's say it is a local administration, a public administration, that administration could indeed buy the licenses, but if they do transfer data on a closed format, then they will make dependent third parties in turn, who will be forced to buy the license. I remember I gave a presentation some time ago, a month ago, and I was asked a question in the question round, and that person asked me, or told me, I have a cousin who has set up a website from which you can download maps in DWG and GML. After some time, people would download maps on those versions, DWG and GML. So I answered him as follows. My brother-in-law has set up a WFS service where you can choose the downloading format for the maps, and 90% of people would choose GML. So this was just an excuse like his, because if your brother-in-law is disseminating or spreading technological dependence, you want to stop him. To prevent dependence from spreading, you want to use standards. There are many types of standards. There are open standards, de facto standards, and closed standards. I will not talk about the last group. Let me comment on open standards, which are the good guys, the nice ones. Open standards are managed by standardizing committees or organizations. They are usually free of charge. You just pay for a distribution fee, but then it's not particularly expensive. And they allow you to use a number of licenses freely, preventing discrimination. With an open standard, you can do whatever you want, basically, with your maps and cartography. Then you have de facto standards. Apparently they are good, but in actual fact, they do not prevent us from becoming technologically dependent. In fact, these standards are standards simply because a lot of people use them, but the patent remains in the creator, with the creator of the software. The only party that could change the standard is the creator of it, and so you keep on being dependent on the creator of the standard. So the only way to go ahead is to use open standards. We have the same diagram here. Map producer, they use private or proprietary or open source software, whatever. A consumer could choose from the same software used by the creator of the data, or to use another software. Basically, the consumer is not dependent on the manufacturer of the maps. From gvSIG, one of our principles is let's try and have the highest number of formats based on open source, not only file formats, but also specification formats for us to download maps remotely. And Well, you may not have noticed, but gvSIG is full of open standards. Let me show you a short video. With a few gvSIG standards. You go to the tab here, press Add, and you get a pull-down menu with many formats. You can find de facto standards, or here we have OGC, another standard, shape, which was another de facto standard. In the case of geospatial databases, the standard is SQL, and here in posted you have specification. On the WCS tab, you find another standard, WMS, another standard, WCS, another OGC standard. And now we will close the window, and the catalog is open with another standard, which is used by libraries and has been used for a long time, DGC, OGC. And then we have the nomenclator client, which uses another OGC standard. So gvSIG implements a great deal of standards. Implementing a standard is relatively easy because you can read the specification, you can implement it, but obviously we are aware of the way we live and where we live, and we try to implement closed formats too. There have been a few attempts, and in the past there was an open source community which could take up to version 2000 of DWG. But what happened next? Version 2004 was released, people wanted it, and so we hired a programmer for maintaining version 2004 because there were no specifications whatsoever. But what happened? The specification was changed, and that was it. We got stuck. Nobody provided us with help, and the only way you can keep this is by having support. Another attempt, ArcSD, and you can use this library. We used it, and we then supported version ArcSDE. However, this library, its performance was a lot worse. We could only use that library, and that library was not particularly operational. So in actual fact, they were preventing us from working with their own protocol.
Another standard was about the specification of the GN, but it was done on the version number 7 of the last version, number 8. I requested it. Well, I requested about a week ago, and I haven't heard. But my colleagues said that they asked for it a year ago, and they're still waiting for it. They're waiting for the specification. So without the specification, it's not possible to support a particular format. So these are the cases of an attempt at the closed format support. Let's go back now to the open formats. And there are mainly two organizations that provide standards. One is OGC, everybody knows it, and the other is the ISO, with the technical committee for standards 148, has to do with the GEO. And we've created a work group with OGC, which is responsible for assessing all those standards. And why? Well, because we are going to be critical with standards now. Standards usually are abstract. They tend to be abstract, and sometimes they tend to be, well, they're impossible to implement because they require a great deal of work, but because they are not easy to handle and they can't be used. We think that the standard must have a benchmark implementation, and that implementation should feed the standard. So they should run in parallel, creating a standard with the benchmark implementation of that standard. From our project, we would have a benchmark implementation for future standards of any kind. I think the standards should be based on benchmark implementation so that specifications derived from them can be used or are usable. And now, about all these boring things, let's talk about something really interesting. We talk about fox and hens. And in theory, as I said before, the standard organizations will take on board any company that wants to take part, great. But in practice, only the big companies have enough resources to put their people there working in standards and specifications. Obviously, a small or medium enterprise can't afford to pay a salary for somebody who only works on standards. But those companies, webs such as Geo and all those are in all the standardizing committees and all the open source committees. And what they want is to sell the image that they are concerned about standards and they're worried about the resources. But as I said before, with the the standard examples, it is clear that what they actually practice is a knowledge hiding system. And they want to sell something, but in practice, they try to keep away knowledge from people. Because if they are really practicing diffusion of knowledge, you will share your knowledge. And we decided what the reason could be. And maybe they wanted to improve their image because, of course, if they are in open source, well, that sells. Well, if that's what they want, well, that's misleading advertising. But well, whatever. But my question is, do you think that these companies are really interested in alternative standards to their specifications? Because obviously, it's not good enough to create a standard. When a new standard comes up, the first question is it usable? Can I work with that standard? Or is it possible to implement it? If the answer is no, well, as I was before, and the answer is yes, well, I may consider using that standard. So there can be many standards. They can keep issuing standards every day, but if you can't use them and you can't implement them because they are abstract, they're good for nothing. And if those that control the standardizing creation, and those are the companies who are not interested in standards to move forward, do you think they're going to issue usable standards? The answer to this question is the same as what happens when you put the fox in charge of the chickens. You can see how this one is taking a chicken, and they know that the other chickens are going to be next. So tonight, think about that when you get home. And as a conclusion, from the gvSIG model, we want free access to information, to knowledge, and technologically speaking. And we can't have access to technology if we don't have specifications. That would be impossible. We can try hard, but we'll never get there. Only if we have access to specifications, you will be able to have an open source model. And that's a cycle that if you break any, break the loop, is not going to be viable. And from gvSIG, we are on the side of shared knowledge. and knowledge is the same, shared by everybody. The differences are something else. They are the resources used, but knowledge should be shared fully. Another conclusion is that we have to avoid technological dependence, and public organizations should be an example. A public organization should never pass on information in closed formats. And the last conclusion is that gvSIG can be a benchmark for standards, and if it's not gvSIG, someone else. But you don't want standards that are not in touch with reality, because if there is an implementation of in free software, obviously the big companies might not be interested in that. And with this, I think I'll finish. Thank you very much. And that's all.
Gracias, Jorge, por esta.
Thank you, Jorge, for that very interesting reflection on standards and the policies that come with it. We've got some time. We're just a little bit late, so we can have a round of questions. And I hope that there is an interesting debate after all the ideas we've seen. I can see some hands up. Okay. For the gvSIG mobile developers, a question. Have you foreseen that there are investments for development in Linux? That is, the open Mogo is quite interesting, but do you think it's come stuck? Do you think that in the future it will be possible to work in the direction of offering alternatives to Windows Mobile? Well, I'm going to answer in the translator understands. We understand people in the mobile development who have gone for open Mogo. I don't know whether there's anybody who's worked in that. There are videos, demo videos, and there are public repositories and it's being used in projects in real-time use. There is a port from gvSIG mobile. The open Mogo future is not clear because the hardware may end up supporting Android, but at any case, port is available and we are working on it. Could you please introduce yourself? Hello? Rafael Ayerbe from the Environment Ministry. My question is for Jorge. I thought his presentation was very interesting about standards and big companies, but my question is if this is a fact in the graphic information systems, and in which ones of them? Geography information systems, we wanted to say, sorry. And in which ones of them, if it is taking place? Well, for what I know, WSF, or WMF, FS, and WMF, it has limitations, but it can be used. WGS can be used professionally. It's not useful because it has many protocol faults. It could be improved a great deal, and that's a clear example of a standard that still has a long way to go before it's really usable by companies. I don't know whether this answers your question. How about the rest of standards? WPS, well, I can't talk about the ones I know from WPS. I think they provide a web service, but maybe I can't answer that. There are people who might know more about it, or GML, for instance, which is a monster. So your opinion is that this is a going through a hard time. Well, my opinion is that some standards work very well and some specifications that don't work so well. At least in our experience, we've seen that some things don't work and are unusable. Thank you. Gabi next. I don't know whether anybody else wants to ask. I just wanted to answer Rafael. My opinion is that yes, OCT is S3, OSGO has its brand in Autodesk, and they issue misleading advertising. And the problem with OGC is that they are taken over by the companies who want to speculate with the products they acquire. So I don't know, obviously, that is the case, yes. My question for Miguel is, my name is Miguel Blanco from the Proyecto Venus 1000, and I'm interested in sensors, and I wanted to ask you whether there is any forecast of interacting gvSIG with RPS servers for radio frequency use. Quite frankly, we don't have this in our project development plan. It's APR is not an OGC. It's probably another standard from another organization. It's basically used by amateur people, and they present radio stations through ARP, and they have connected to an APRS server. We are experimenting with this with radio stations that go out and are represented in mobility, but at present those works are being done with private software, and our intention is to pass it on to open source software. Well, we haven't foreseen this, but of course we are flexible. We don't want to have a goal and hit our head against the wall if we can't get there, but any suggestion like this is perfect for us. So we can talk about it and see exactly what it would cost or what it's about, and maybe put some effort into this rather than other things that's not so interesting. But about sensors, we are going to talk the last day. But you want to give support to sensor movement enable, and we also work in the inclusion of SAS WNS for alert warnings and notifications. But if it's the standard is interesting and anybody is interesting, well, we can dedicate some resources to it. Anybody else? I have a question and a comment.
We are very happy that you have been able to attend our conference from Hungary, and I would like to ask you regarding the gvSIG project in Osor. You said that you have some metrics and you can measure what is the interest of the community in the projects. How do you see gvSIG in Osor? Is it a project that is rising expectations or compared to others?
Yes, actually we have some metrics about the project itself, not really about the community behind the project, so the downloaders of the project. But for example, in terms of gvSIG now, our store projects enjoy 60,000, 20,000 downloads altogether, and gvSIG just made a strategic decision to host all of its projects on Osor. So it's quite new, but I think it's the number 5 or number 6 project. One of the projects are number 5, number 6. They have been downloaded. One of the projects has been downloaded 5,000 times. And if you look at the project search page on Osor, you will see that the most active project now is the gvSIG desktop. So it's, you can see that it's really, really active, and there are a lot of committers and commitments in this project. So far, actually it has been so active that we are considering to double the bandwidth of OZOR, because at one time we had 100 person downloading gvSIG projects at the same time, so we have to build a little bit up the bandwidth. So yes, we're very, very happy that we have gvSIG.
Very good news. So it looks like the lemma that we choose for the conference, gvSIG is growing, and it's really true.
It is growing.
Yeah, very happy. ¿Alguna otra cuestión?
Any more questions? Well, it's not very late, so I would like to ask another question about standards. There is a problem that arises from the question that arise, like open source software, the standards are updated. How do you see the development of standards? Because sometimes they get very complicated. Is gvSIG making any efforts so that their project is scalable and compatible with the changes that we often see in standards? Well, the world evolves, and there are new needs, and I think standards do evolve, but not always the first implementation is the best, obviously. So until you don't have the system in production, you don't really see the faults. But I think standards have to evolve in the same way that the private formats develop. From the gvSIG project, we want to give support to the present standards, and we have enough resources. We try to move along standards at the same speed. I don't know whether that answers your question.